The folded guest list slides toward me, and my name isn't where it should be. I hold the paper between my fingers, as if it might correct itself, as if ink could feel shame and move, and the room keeps breathing without me. Bright light pours across the tables, clean and unforgiving, catching the rims of glasses and the edges of white plates. Someone laughs near the bar. A phone lifts, then lowers. I stay standing because sitting would mean choosing a place, and I no longer have one. Daniel's hand brushes the back of a chair and stops a small pause that tells me this is intentional. I look at the list again. The paper is creased once down the middle, folded with care names aligned in neat columns. I trace the line where my name should be, then stop tracing because I understand what tracing is for. Victor, the venue manager, clears his throat and checks the room, eyes moving in practiced arcs, making sure the sound carries evenly. He nods to the DJ. The wireless mic squeals softly and then settles. I breathe through my nose and keep my face neutral. People are watching without knowing they're watching. I feel the moment closing like a door that doesn't slam, just settles into its frame. Daniel smiles at someone across the room and does not look at me. He adjusts his cuff, then reaches for the mic stand and lets his fingers rest there, possessive but casual. I shift the folded guest list to my left hand and smooth the crease with my thumb. The paper edge presses into my skin, a thin, sharp reminder that objects don't lie. I catch Lauren's reflection in the glass behind the bar. Her posture relaxed, her attention angled toward the center, like she already knows where she belongs. The chairs scrape as people find their places. I hear my name spoken somewhere else lightly, as if testing whether it still fits the room. I do not answer. The ceiling lights hum. I count 3 breaths. A server passes with a tray and glances at the list in my hand, then at my face, then away. Daniel leans in toward Victor and murmurs something I can't hear, but I can read the choreography, keep it moving, keep it smooth. I think of how easy it would be to say something sharp to demand correction, to break the glassy calm, and how that would hand him the story. I will not hand him anything. I fold the paper again more carefully this time and place it on the edge of the table, as if it were always meant to rest there. The room settles. The DJ taps the mic once. Daniel clears his throat. He thanks everyone for coming, his voice warm, practiced, built for rooms like this. I watch his mouth form words that float above me and land everywhere else. The list stays where I put it. My chair remains empty. Someone squeezes past me with an apology that is too quick to be sincere. I step back to give space and feel the boundary redraw itself. In that bright pause, I understand the night has been arranged without me, and I am meant to accept it quietly. The applause comes on cue, polite and brief, like a door closing softly. I do not clap. I do not move. I lift my chin and meet my own eyes in the reflection of the glass podium across the room, then look away before I give myself anything I can't take back. The music swells just enough to fill the gap. I straighten my shoulders, slip the folded guest list into my coat pocket, and decide where I will stand next. I let the room keep talking while I learn exactly how this was done. I'm Emily Carter, 38, a nonprofit development director from Naperville, Illinois. I wore the lanyard badge because I had arrived early, because arriving early made me useful, and usefulness had always felt safer than asking for reassurance. The badge rested flat against my coat, the plastic warm from my hand, the cord rubbing the seam as I walked the hallway that led to the main room. The doorway ahead held a clean band of light, bright on one side, softer on the other, and I paused at the threshold without naming why. Half in, half out. The room smelled like citrus cleaner and evergreen, a holiday brightness that promised order. I stepped forward, and the light took my face. People were already there, moving chairs, aligning centerpieces, performing small rituals of preparation that made a gathering feel earned. Daniel had kissed my cheek when I arrived quick and public, then turned back to Victor to confirm sound levels. I adjusted the badge so it faced forward legible, as if clarity could be worn. I told myself the night would run on rails because I had helped lay them. I checked a printed schedule on the wall, then looked away when I felt watched, though no one was looking at me directly. Lauren arrived quietly, not late enough to be noticed, not early enough to help. She greeted Daniel with a nod that lasted a fraction longer than politeness required. I noted it, then cataloged it as nothing. The badge tapped lightly against my ribs as I walked, a metronome keeping time with my steps. I took a stack of programs from a table and squared the edges, straightened. A crooked ribbon moved a chair 2 inches to the left. I told myself I was calming the room when I was calming myself. The doorway behind me stayed half-lit, the hall dimmer now that the main lights were up. I glanced back once and felt the pull of the threshold, then faced forward again. I had learned how to ignore that pull. Daniel spoke with Victor about the order of remarks, about keeping the flow tight. His voice carried the tone he used when he wanted things smooth, when friction felt like failure. I smiled at a couple I knew from work and accepted a compliment about the decor. My badge flashed under the lights as I turned. I thought about how many times I had coordinated events like this, how many rooms I had made hospitable without being the reason people came. Lauren drifted towards the bar, her coat placed with care over a chair near the center. I noticed the placement, the way the chair stayed unclaimed but reserved. I told myself chairs were chairs. Someone asked where to put the extra place settings, and I answered without thinking, pointing to a side table. The badge swung forward, then back, a small arc that matched my breath. I heard Daniel laugh, a sound that always pulled attention, and I watched the attention move to him like iron filings. I told myself this was normal. I told myself normal did not require commentary. The hallway door clicked shut behind a server, and for a moment, the room felt sealed, self-contained. I felt the edge of my phone through my coat pocket and resisted the urge to check it. I didn't need confirmation of anything. I needed the night to start and then pass. Victor tested the mic again, and the feedback died quickly. Daniel nodded approval. I stood near the doorway, not blocking it, not claiming it, aware of the light line that cut across the floor and my shoes on either side of it. I crossed fully into the room and let the badge settle. The pull eased. The music shifted to something softer. Guests began to arrive in small waves, greetings, overlapping coats, handed off, names called. I greeted people, introduced, others kept the machine running. Lauren's presence grew more central without effort, like a magnet finding its field. I saw Daniel angle his body toward her once, then correct it. I noted the correction, then dismissed it. I had built a marriage on dismissals that felt reasonable at the time. I straightened the badge again and reminded myself that visibility was not the same as value, and value did not need to be proven tonight. Standing under that doorway's clean light, I told myself preparation could substitute for belonging if I stayed precise enough. I didn't know then how the threshold would move, how the light would shift to show me where I was not meant to stand. I finished my circuit, returned the empty box to storage, and took my place near Daniel as the room filled. The badge brushed my wrist as I clasped my hands. I felt composed. I felt ready. I believed the night would begin where it always had, with me inside it. I stepped fully forward, unaware the line would soon be redrawn. The venue keycard was cool and weightless in my palm, a small rectangle that promised access without conversation. I took it from the hook by the service door and slipped into the back corridor, the noise of the room thinning to a workable hush. The hall smelled like paper and citrus, less festive, more honest. I told myself I was retrieving extra programs, that this was still me being useful, but my steps had a purpose I didn't say out loud. The back office door opened with a soft click, and the fluorescent light came on in a clean strip above the desk. A laptop sat open where Victor had left it, the screen angled just enough that I could see without touching anything. I stopped, counted a breath, then another. On the screen was an email thread subject line, clipped sender familiar. The body scrolled to a point that felt chosen. I did not read it like a thief. I read it like a person checking a map. The message confirmed a seating adjustment made earlier that afternoon, justified as flow optimization, routed through the back office with a short reference code, E7Q, and a location tag that matched this room. It wasn't dramatic. It was neat. It was signed off with a tone that assumed agreement. I noticed the timeline and the phrasing that suggested the decision had been final before anyone asked me anything. My name appeared once bracketed by neutrality and then disappeared into a phrase about guest comfort. I felt the room behind me as if it were watching through the wall. I let the door close with care and placed the key card on the desk, then picked it up again, feeling the difference between leaving something and claiming it. The corridor clock ticked a sound that made me aware of my posture. I straightened and took a photo with my eyes, not my phone. I didn't need proof yet. I needed alignment. The light buzzed faintly. I scanned for other details and found none that surprised me. That was the surprise. Everything about the email read like a plan that had passed through enough hands to feel normal. I turned off the light and locked the office, the keycard chirping softly as it confirmed compliance. Back in the corridor, a server brushed past with a crate of glassware and apologized, then laughed, then kept moving. The night was resuming without friction. I slid the keycard into my pocket and pressed it flat with my fingers, grounding myself in the sensation of plastic and edges. When I returned to the room, the music had shifted up a notch, and people were greeting each other with the relief of arrival. Daniel caught my eye and smiled the public smile he used to set tone. I smiled back because smiling cost less than explaining. He asked if everything was set, and I said yes, because it was. Lauren stood near the bar, her coat draped over the chair I had noticed earlier, her glass untouched. I saw Daniel's glance flick toward the chair, and then away, an avoidance that felt practiced. I moved a stack of programs from one table to another, and felt the way my hands stayed steady. The email sat in my mind without expanding. I was careful not to connect it to anything else yet. I watched the flow of people, and noted where gaps formed, where chairs filled quickly, and where they remained open. The DJ announced a brief pause before remarks, and the room leaned into anticipation. I told myself I could still be wrong. I told myself that logistics often look personal when you're standing too close. I took the keycard out again and slid it between my fingers, the small ritual reminding me that access could be granted and revoked without emotion. Victor passed and nodded his attention, already moving on. Daniel spoke with him briefly, their heads close, then separated. I noticed Daniel didn't ask me anything about the seating. That omission felt louder than the email. I stepped aside to let a couple pass, and felt my shoulder brush the edge of a chair that had been pulled slightly inward, reserving space. The edge caught my sleeve. I adjusted it and moved on. I kept my face composed and my voice light when someone asked where to place a gift bag. I answered accurately. I was good at accuracy. I thought about how many decisions get framed as neutral because neutrality feels safer than ownership. I thought about the way my name had been included and excluded with equal efficiency. Standing there with the keycard warming in my pocket, I recognized the first fracture. This wasn't confusion, it was choreography. The realization didn't spike my pulse. It settled it. I began to build a quiet list in my head, not of accusations, but of steps. If there was an email, there would be others. If there was a back office, there would be records. If the plan had a shape, it would leave edges. I moved closer to Daniel and listened as he thanked someone for coming early, his gratitude smooth. His eyes skimming past me, as if we'd already agreed on where I belonged. I caught Lauren's gaze once, and saw something like acknowledgement there. Not triumph, more like confirmation that the map was accurate. I broke the look first. The DJ raised a hand and the room hushed. I slipped the keycard deeper into my pocket and let my hands rest at my sides. I was still inside the room. I was still on the list of people present. I just wasn't on the list that mattered. I didn't correct it yet. I didn't need to. The night was young and the fracture had given me a direction. I decided to wait, document, and let the pattern finish revealing itself. The wireless mic rested in its cradle at the edge of the stage, black and unremarkable, the kind of object that pretends neutrality while deciding who gets heard. Victor moved with purpose, tapping the receiver once, twice, eyes scanning the room for feedback and faces for readiness. The space was fully public now, bright and open. Coats checked drinks, poured phones lifted just enough to suggest memory would be captured, whether invited or not. Daniel stood near the podium, shoulders relaxed, smile calibrated for a room that expected smoothness. I took a step back to widen the aisle and felt the floor vibrate lightly as chairs shifted into their final positions. A server brushed past me with a tray, the clink of glass punctuating the low murmur. Victor gestured toward the seating area and held up a folded confirmation sheet, a small wave that asked for agreement without discussion. I moved closer, close enough to see the table markings printed in clean type letters and numbers that turned space into policy. He pointed once, then again to a cluster near the center. Table C12. The number sat there like a verdict, pretending to be logistics. Lauren's name was printed cleanly at the top of the grouping, centered with a +1 aligned beneath it. The chairs around C12 were already filling bodies leaning in, claiming proximity. My name appeared farther down the page, not adjacent, not even nearby, placed along the edge where service paths widened and attention thinned. Victor didn't look at me as he spoke. He spoke to the room. "We'll keep these central tables clear for remarks," he said, voice even practiced. Phones rose a fraction higher. A woman near the bar angled her camera and whispered to her friend, the whisper carrying just enough to be heard. Daniel nodded at Victor and reached for the mic, then paused as the feedback chirped a quick corrective squeal that pulled heads toward the stage. He laughed lightly and waited while Victor adjusted levels. The sound settled. Daniel leaned in and thanked everyone for coming. His voice amplified and warm, his eyes scanning the faces that mattered. I watched how he avoided looking at me, without appearing to avoid me, a skill honed by repetition. Lauren slid into her seat at C12 with an ease that suggested rehearsal, her coat draped over the chair back, her posture, open, belonging implied. The people around her shifted to make room, smiles exchanged the center tightening. I stood where I was and felt the periphery take shape around my shoes. A guest I knew touched my arm and asked quietly if everything was okay, eyes flicking from the confirmation sheet to my face. I nodded once, small and precise, because nodding kept the machine moving. Victor folded the sheet and tucked it into his clipboard, the actions sealing the decision. A man at C12 raised his glass toward Lauren and said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed, the sound carrying under the lights. Daniel's voice flowed into an anecdote meant to warm the room, and the room warmed on cue. Applause rose and fell like a practiced wave. I felt the public nature of it settle into my shoulders, the knowledge that this arrangement was now witnessed, shared, normalized by repetition. I took 2 steps toward the aisle to clear space as Victor moved past his earpiece, catching the light. He murmured, "All set," to Daniel, and Daniel replied, "Perfect," without looking away from the crowd. The word landed between us like a line drawn with chalk. A server paused near me, checking table numbers against her tray, and I caught the number C12 again. On the small card she held the ink bold and unquestioned. I heard someone say Lauren's name with admiration, and another person respond with familiarity, as if proximity conferred intimacy. The mic amplified a joke, and laughter rippled outward. I folded my hands to keep them still. The room smelled like citrus and wine and new fabric. The lights were unforgiving in their clarity, faces, readable reactions immediate. I understood then that this wasn't a private slight dressed up as convenience. It was a public confirmation, a seating chart turned announcement. Under those bright lights, with table C12 claimed and applauded, the room ratified a choice I had not been allowed to contest. The realization steadied me. I did not raise my voice. I did not step forward. I watched how easily a piece of paper could rearrange loyalties when introduced as policy. Daniel finished his remarks and handed the mic back to Victor, who nodded and adjusted the stand, the feedback briefly chirping again before settling. Music swelled, signaling the next phase. People leaned in toward their tables, conversation resuming with the comfort of structure restored. I stepped back another pace and felt the boundary lock into place, the periphery fully drawn. I met Lauren's eyes once as she lifted her glass, her expression composed neither apologetic nor defiant, just aligned with the plan. I turned away before anything could be exchanged that would feed the room. I noted the witnesses without counting them, the cameras without tracking them, the confirmation without naming it aloud. The wireless mic rested back in its cradle, innocent again, having done its work. I moved toward the hallway with a calm that surprised me, already cataloging what had been shown, and how it had been shown, already measuring the distance between a public arrangement and the records that produced it. I let the applause fade and marked the proof the room had just given me. The clipboard with the incident log felt heavier than it was, the metal clip cool against my palm as I stepped into a quieter corner near the service corridor. The noise of the room dulled here, laughter softened by walls and distance, and I welcomed the narrowness because it gave me edges to press against. Victor had left the clipboard unattended, pages neatly stacked, columns printed with calm authority. I didn't read it like an accusation. I read it like a pattern. Times without clocks, notes without adjectives, check marks that said nothing went wrong because nothing had been named. I flipped one page, then another, the paper whispering its compliance. The log showed routine movements, minor adjustments, small deviations noted and resolved. What it didn't show was the space where conversation should have been, the gap where explanation usually lives. I leaned the clipboard against the wall and listened to the room through it, voices rising and falling, as if the night were breathing on its own. Daniel's laugh carried farther than the others, buoyant and confident, the sound he used when he wanted to be remembered as generous. I waited for him to come find me. He didn't. Minutes passed, measured by the movement of servers and the shift of music, and still he didn't. When I did cross paths with him near the bar, he touched my arm lightly and said, "We'll talk later," with a smile that suggested agreement already reached. I nodded because nodding preserved the fiction. He turned away before I could respond. His attention already redirected, his body angling toward Lauren without appearing to. I noted the angle. I noted the distance. I noted the absence of urgency. Back at the clipboard, I added nothing and removed nothing, but I understood what the log couldn't capture: the avoidance loop. Daniel avoided eye contact when proximity would require acknowledgement. He avoided conversation when it would demand choice. He avoided correction because correction would expose intention. I watched him circle the room with practiced ease, greeting donors, thanking friends, placing a hand at the small of Lauren's back for a fraction too long before withdrawing it, as if remembering himself. Each time he withdrew, he glanced toward me and then away, a repetition that felt like habit, not accident. I marked the repetitions in my head because the log would not. A server asked if we needed more chairs, and Daniel answered without consulting me, gesturing toward the center where Lauren sat. "We're good," he said, and the server moved on. I felt the word settle. We. The clipboard edge pressed into my ribs as I tucked it closer, grounding myself in the physicality of it. I moved through the room once more, slow and observant, noting where conversation clustered and where it thinned, where Lauren's presence drew people in, and where my own seemed to slide past. I caught my reflection in a darkened window and adjusted my posture, not for him, for me. The music shifted to something livelier, and the room responded, bodies loosening, laughter rising. Daniel's avoidance sharpened, as the room relaxed, a paradox that made sense once I saw it ease, for everyone else required distance from me. I stepped back into the corridor again, the light there dimmer, the air cooler. The clipboard rested against my hip, its presence steady. I thought about how behavioral evidence rarely announces itself. It accumulates quietly in what isn't done, in the spaces where responsibility should land and doesn't. I thought about how logs are designed to record disruptions, not the careful maintenance of harm. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't confront Lauren. I didn't need to. I had crossed the threshold where emotion gives way to accounting. As the avoidance loop tightened, I understood silence itself had become a record of intent. The realization didn't break me. It organized me. I slipped the clipboard back onto the hook where it belonged, unchanged, its neutrality intact, and returned to the room with a calmer pulse. Daniel passed me again and said, "You okay without stopping?" I said yes without lying, because I was okay in the way that follows clarity. He nodded and moved on satisfied. I watched Lauren accept a compliment and deflect it modestly, her performance precise. The room hummed. I felt the internal break complete, not with pain, but with a clean division between what I felt and what I would do next. I stopped waiting for acknowledgement and started counting what his silence proved. The projector remote lay on the edge of the AV table like a quiet permission slip, matte black, its buttons worn smooth by repetition, and I picked it up because holding something operational steadied my hands. The corridor outside the main room had emptied the music, now a distant pulse rather than a presence, and Victor stood beside the equipment rack with the focused patience of someone who knew his limits and worked inside them. He glanced at the remote in my hand, then at my face, then back to the rack, a 3-beat exchange that acknowledged process without inviting confession. I told him I needed to check one thing for timing, and he nodded once, policy-safe eyes already on the monitor. The CCTV feed came up clean, split into panes, the lobby camera occupying the largest square, bright and unromantic. People moved through the frame, earlier coats coming off gestures, looping, nothing dramatic enough to remember, unless you knew where to look. I leaned closer and felt the light from the screen cut across my cheek, white and exact. Victor scrubbed back with 2 precise taps, stopping at a moment that felt ordinary, then advanced a few seconds. The timestamp flickered, settled, then flickered again. I felt the echo land, the sense of access narrowing under clarity, and asked him to hold it there. He did. The mismatch wasn't loud. It was a small drift, a quiet disagreement between what had been said and what had been recorded. I watched a server cross the frame tray level, and then watched the corner digits stutter, not aligning with the sequence I'd been told earlier about when seating shifted. The still Victor pulled, froze a body mid-step, and the light split the doorway into halves, one side bright, one side dim. It felt like the motif finding its spine. I didn't accuse. I asked for a copy window. Victor told me what policy allowed. I told him I'd work within it. He printed a still with a short reference S9, scribbled the lobby location in the margin, and slid it toward me without commentary. The paper was warm from the printer. I held the projector remote tighter, feeling the click under my thumb as Victor muted the feed. We stood there long enough for the room to breathe without us. I thanked him and returned the remote to the table, but not before memorizing the order of buttons, the way control looked like a rectangle until you pressed it. When I stepped back into the hall, my phone vibrated once, not a message, just the reminder that it existed. I didn't check it. I went to the restroom instead, locked the stall, and let the overhead light buzz while I replayed the sequence in my head. I washed my hands, slowly, watched the water clear soap from my fingers, and counted how many assumptions had collapsed without making a sound. The night had a design, yes, but designs leave fingerprints when they have to move people quickly. Back near the AV table, Daniel appeared with the practiced concern he used when he sensed distance. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone, careful, public safe. I said yes, because I was learning the value of accuracy. He nodded, satisfied by the shape of my answer, and glanced toward the stage, as if pulled by gravity. He didn't ask what I'd checked. He didn't need to, if the check confirmed what he believed had already been managed. Lauren passed behind him, her shoulder brushing his arm, and he stepped aside to make room, a courtesy that revealed priority without speech. I watched the exchange and filed it next to the still, not as emotion, but as alignment. Margaret Sloane's name surfaced in my mind with the calm certainty of a next step. I stepped into a quieter corner, pulled out my phone, and typed a message that stayed factual, procedural, spare. I didn't send it yet. I needed one more anchor. The echo demanded a bind. I returned to the monitor area and asked Victor carefully whether the seating change had been cued before or after the lobby flow peaked. He answered with policy language and a time window, not a clock, but it was enough. I nodded and thanked him again, aware that gratitude is a currency that keeps doors from slamming. When I slipped the printed still into my coat, the paper bent slightly and held the crease. The projector remote remained where I'd left it, obedient and mute. I moved back into the room as the music softened and people shifted toward dessert, the flow resetting the stage, waiting. Daniel stood with a small group near the podium, laughing lightly, his hand resting on the glass surface as if claiming it by touch. The white light above the stage made faces readable and left no place for shadows to hide. I stood at the edge of that light and felt the chain tighten, not with fear, but with focus. I had crossed from noticing to knowing. The CCTV mismatch was not an accident. It was a tolerance built into a plan that assumed no one would look twice. I looked twice. I watched Daniel scan the room and avoid my eyes again, and this time the avoidance registered as confirmation rather than wound. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to compress the timeline by forcing a reaction. I needed the structure to hold. I slipped back to the corridor and sent the message to Margaret, attaching nothing promising context, requesting a brief call later. The send icon vanished, and with it went the last of my uncertainty. I returned the phone to my pocket and leaned against the wall, feeling the cool paint through my coat. The doorway nearby glowed with half-light, the cut lines sharp across the floor, and I stood just outside it, choosing position. The echo settled fully, then a sense of controlled narrowing that left only one path forward. Under the white glow of the monitor, the timestamp's quiet drift bound intention to proof and tightened the door I would walk through. I stepped back into the room with the calm of someone carrying a map. Daniel caught my eye at last and smiled, relief flickering when he saw no challenge on my face. I smiled back because timing matters. The projector hummed softly, waiting. The room breathed. I adjusted my bracelet once, not from nerves, but to mark the moment. The chain had tightened, and I knew exactly where it would lock next. I let the echo hold, and prepared to move only when the record demanded it. The sealed legal envelope rested against my ribs. As I crossed the room, its weight more psychological than physical, the thick paper stiff enough to hold shape and intention. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't need to. Its presence was the point, a quiet escalation that changed how I walked and where I stood. Margaret had arranged it earlier. Careful language folded into careful stock, my name typed cleanly where it belonged. I slipped the envelope from my coat pocket and checked the seal with my thumb, then returned it without breaking it, letting the boundary remain intact. The room had shifted into a softer phase, dessert plates appearing, conversations, deepening laughter, rounding into familiarity. Daniel thrived in this register. He moved from cluster to cluster with the ease of someone who believed the hardest work had already been done. I watched him work the room and noted how often he angled his body to keep Lauren within arm's reach without announcing the choice. She followed his orbit with the calm of someone who had learned the center would hold. I stayed on the edge of the light and let the envelope anchor me there. When Daniel approached, his tone was lighter than before, a sign he believed the night had stabilized. "You disappeared," he said, a mild reproach framed as concern. I smiled and said I'd been handling a detail, which was true. He nodded, satisfied by the shape of my answer, and glanced toward Lauren as if checking alignment. It was the glance that mattered, not the words. I waited for him to ask about the envelope. He didn't. He noticed it, though. His eyes flicked down and back up, a microbeat of recognition quickly smoothed over. He said something about how well everything was going. I agreed because agreement kept the surface intact. We stood there long enough for the silence between us to say what neither of us would. Then he was pulled away by a guest, and the orbit tightened again without me. I moved toward a quieter corner near the bar where the light fell cleanly and phones tended to linger, not raised, just present. Lauren joined a conversation there, her glass half full, her laughter measured. I felt the envelope press into my side and adjusted my coat so it sat flat or visible without being displayed. A donor I knew from work leaned in and asked softly whether I was staying late. I said yes, and meant it differently than he heard. As the room settled, I pulled out my phone and opened the financial app I'd checked earlier in the week for unrelated reasons. I didn't scroll. I didn't refresh. I opened the screen I needed and let my eyes rest on the masked digits that had caught my attention before. The app masked everything except the ending. 47, clean and unmistakable, the same suffix I'd seen referenced in a note that passed too easily as routine. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't forward it. I memorized the alignment amount, irrelevant date, irrelevant the relationship between accounts, what mattered. The pattern held. I closed the app and slid the phone away, my pulse steady. This was the pressure escalator not because of money, but because money leaves a trail even when people think it's quiet. I turned and nearly collided with Daniel, who had reappeared with a plate in hand. He joked about saving me a bite of something I liked. I thanked him and declined. His eyes drifted to my coat again, then back to my face. "Everything okay?" He asked the question, now a refrain. I said yes again and meant it in a narrower sense. He nodded, relieved by the word rather than the truth. We stood side by side for a moment, the envelope between us like a third presence. And then Lauren stepped closer, bridging the space with a comment about the music. Daniel responded immediately, his attention shifting without friction. I stepped back and let the geometry reassert itself. Victor passed with a quick nod, his earpiece catching the light. I wondered how many times tonight he'd adjusted something to keep flow smooth, and how often smoothness had been mistaken for neutrality. I moved toward the corridor and paused, leaning against the wall where the light cut cleanly across the floor. The half-lit doorway framed the room, the chain tightening not with threat, but with inevitability. I checked my phone again and saw Margaret's reply, brief and precise, available later, ready when I was documentation preferred. I typed back a single word, soon, and put the phone away. I didn't need her yet. I needed the room to complete its own logic. Back inside, the conversation turned to plans after the holidays, to trips and returns to routines that assumed continuity. Daniel spoke about schedules with confidence, his voice easy, his hand occasionally finding Lauren's elbow, as if to guide her through space. I watched the gesture repeat, counted it once, then stopped counting. Counting was no longer necessary. I found a seat at the periphery and sat, finally choosing a place, because choosing mattered now. The envelope rested on my lap, my palm over the seal, my thumb tracing the edge where paper met glue. I didn't open it. Opening would collapse options too early. A guest across from me glanced at it, and then at my face, curiosity flickering and fading. I met her eyes and smiled a polite end to inquiry. The room hummed, plates clinked. The DJ lowered the volume to accommodate conversation. Daniel raised his glass to toast someone else's milestone, his voice carrying just enough authority to hold attention. I listened without listening, my focus narrowing to sequence. The financial alignment had done its work. The envelope had done its work. The authority seed was in place. Officer Brooks's name sat quietly in my mind, ready not yet spoken aloud. I stood again and moved closer to the center, not claiming it, just testing distance. Daniel saw me and hesitated a fraction of a second that told me he felt the pressure without understanding its source. He smiled anyway. Lauren watched me watch him. Her expression, careful curiosity, threading through composure. I nodded to her once, not friendly, not hostile, just acknowledging proximity. She nodded back, a mirror without warmth. As the envelope pressed its quiet authority against my side, the account ending. 47 confirmed the path was no longer reversible. I returned to the edge of the light and waited. My posture relaxed, my face open, my timing precise. The room would give me what I needed if I let it keep talking. Daniel finished his toast, and applause followed, easy and unthinking. I joined the applause because joining mattered until it didn't. When it faded, I felt the lock click into place, not audibly but decisively, a door chain settling under white light. I held position, letting the pressure build until proof demanded its own entrance. The time-stamped CCTV still lay between my palms like a fragile certainty, the paper thin but decisive, its edges catching the light whenever I shifted. I had printed it earlier and folded it once, not to hide it, but to give it a crease I could feel. The still showed the lobby at a moment that looked unremarkable, until you learned where to stand, a server mid-step, a guest turning the doorway, split cleanly by light, and in the corner, the digits marking time that refused to align with the story I'd been told. I sat at a small table near the corridor and smoothed the page, letting the image settle my breathing. Around me, the room loosened into post-dinner rhythms, voices, lower bodies angled inward. Daniel leaned against the podium with a glass in hand, talking about travel plans, his confidence steady. Lauren stood close, her posture easy, the center holding them both without question. I watched the geometry and waited for the moment when observation would become action. My phone buzzed lightly. A notification surfaced from a private account I recognized without opening it, the kind of alert that came from drafts, saved, not posts, shared. I opened it once carefully, the glow of the screen narrowing my vision. The draft wasn't public. It was a message shaped for later, a caption rehearsed for an audience that hadn't been invited yet, written in a tone of gratitude and arrival that assumed consensus. The language described a holiday spent where it mattered, framed as alignment, rather than choice. I didn't scroll far. I didn't need to. The timestamp on the draft placed its creation earlier than the seating explanation had allowed, before the night had officially arranged itself. The contradiction sat there quietly, not accusing, just refusing to reconcile. I closed the app and slipped the phone back into my coat, feeling the click of finality. The reversal didn't explode. It inverted. Everything that had felt ambiguous now felt rehearsed, and everything rehearsed leaves residue. I stood and walked toward the lobby, with the still folded in my hand, the floor reflecting light back at my shoes. Victor glanced up from the equipment rack and nodded. I didn't speak. I didn't need him yet. Near the lobby entrance, a small group had gathered to check coats, the flow thinning and thickening in waves. I stepped to the side, angled my body to see the doorway line that cut the floor, and watched it bisect the space the way it had in the still. A guest asked me the time, and I answered without looking at my phone because clocks weren't the point anymore. When Daniel's voice rose behind me, punctuating a joke, I felt the room turn toward him by reflex. I turned with it and met his eyes across the space. He smiled, expecting nothing, and I returned the smile with the ease of someone who had already crossed a threshold. Lauren noticed the exchange and tilted her head, curiosity threading through composure. She said something to Daniel, and he nodded, but his attention lagged a fraction behind his expression. That lag mattered. I moved closer to the stage without claiming it, letting the light find me. The still warmed in my hand. I thought about how drafts reveal intent more honestly than posts because they're written without witnesses. I thought about how timestamps don't argue, they wait. Margaret's message echoed in my pocket, a readiness I hadn't needed until now. I pulled the still out and glanced at it again, letting the corner digits anchor me. The room's music softened as the DJ adjusted volume, a signal more than a change. I felt the pressure of phones in pockets, the expectation of the next beat. Daniel cleared his throat and shifted his stance, preparing to speak again, and I realized the sequence would either lock or loosen, depending on where I placed one step. I took that step slow and visible, and the light caught the paper in my hand, bright enough to register, without explanation. Daniel's eyes dropped, then lifted. He hesitated. Lauren followed his gaze and stilled. The room didn't quiet yet, but it leaned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't announce anything. I stood where the doorway line crossed the stage light and let the still speak by existing. The contradiction between the draft's creation time and the seating rationale tightened the logic into a single shape. The CCTV image had shown movement that contradicted the narrative of last-minute necessity. The draft confirmed intention before logistics were blamed. The reversal completed itself, not as shock, but as alignment. I felt the echo settle into resolve, the chain no longer just tightening, but defining. Daniel laughed too quickly and took a sip of his drink, eyes flicking toward Victor and back searching for a release valve. There wasn't one. I watched Lauren's hand tighten around her glass, the smile she wore recalibrating as if searching for the right audience. The DJ's music dipped another notch and conversation thinned. Someone near the bar whispered my name, tentative. I nodded once, not inviting help, not refusing it. I was aware of the cameras without locating them, aware of the phones without counting them. I thought about the safety of drafts and how they betray confidence when confidence outruns discretion. I folded the still again and slipped it back into my coat, not to hide it, but to keep the sequence intact. With the draft's quiet timestamp contradicting the lobby, still the night flipped from misunderstanding to premeditation. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me exact. Daniel stepped toward me and stopped, his voice dropping. "Can we talk?" He asked, the first real request of the night. I met his eyes and said, later with a softness that offered no timeline. He nodded, trapped by politeness, and stepped back. The room resumed, a murmur uncertain but attentive. I felt the moment crest and pass without spilling. The reversal had done its work. The next move would require witnesses. I moved away from the stage and toward the corridor, letting the light fall off my shoulders. My phone buzzed again. I checked it this time. Margaret was ready. I typed 2 words. Have proof, and put the phone away. I took a breath that felt earned and let it out slowly, aware of the half-lit doorway behind me and the full-lit space ahead. The chain had tightened enough to hold weight. The record would now demand its own terms. I let the room catch up to the truth while I prepared to bring it fully into the light. The USB drive sat inside its clear evidence bag, like a promise that couldn't be unmade, the plastic crinkling softly when I shifted my grip, the red zip seal catching the light, as if to announce seriousness without sound. I carried it the way you carry something fragile and final. Elbows close posture, relaxed, eyes up. The drive itself was unremarkable, small, matte, forgettable, but what it held had edges now, not because I'd sharpened them, but because the night had done it for me. I moved through the room in a slow arc, letting conversations thin as I passed, feeling the way attention followed motion when motion looked intentional. Near the service corridor, I unfolded the printed seating chart I'd retrieved earlier, the paper stiff from fresh ink columns, aligned table markers clean. The chart confirmed what the confirmation sheet had shown, but added the physicality the room understood, circles, arrows, and the color code used by staff to route guests without discussion. Blue. The badge color printed next to Lauren's placement at C12 was blue, the same designation Victor had used to flag central seating for remarks and cameras. My name sat elsewhere. Not blue. A neutral tone meant for edges and movement. The chart smelled faintly of toner. I refolded it and slid it into the evidence bag behind the drive, the plastic whispering agreement. This was the cornering moment, the point where intention stopped being abstract and became architectural. I stepped into a pocket of space near the bar where reflections doubled faces and light bounced back from glass. Daniel noticed me there and slowed his path, curving as if to intercept without committing. I didn't speed up or slow down. I let him choose his approach. He smiled when he reached me, the public smile now carrying a hairline fracture. "You okay?" he asked again. Habit dressed as care. I said yes, because I was. He glanced at the bag and then at my face, his eyes searching for a version of me that would reassure him the bag was theatrical. It wasn't. Lauren appeared at his shoulder, her presence easy, her curiosity less contained now. "What's that?" she asked lightly, her tone calibrated for plausible innocence. I answered with accuracy, not explanation. "Records." Daniel laughed too loudly and reached for his glass, then set it down without drinking. The room shifted its weight, a subtle redistribution of attention, as people sensed a change without knowing its shape. I felt phones wake in pockets. I felt the cameras without counting them. I took a step back to widen the space, making room not for confrontation, but for clarity. The seating chart did its quiet work in my mind, the blue designation clicking into place with the CCTV still, and the draft timestamp 3 points forming a plane that no amount of charm could bend. Daniel tried again, softer. "Can we take a minute?" he asked, eyes flicking toward the corridor. I shook my head once, small and precise. "Not privately," I said, and watched him understand the limit as if it were a physical barrier. He nodded, trapped by the rules he'd relied on all night. Victor passed with his clipboard and paused, sensing gravity. I nodded to him, a courtesy that acknowledged policy. He nodded back and kept moving, his neutrality intact. I held the evidence bag higher, not above my head, just enough that the red seal caught the stage light and reflected it outward. A guest near the bar leaned closer to her friend, whispering. The DJ lowered the music another notch without being asked. Daniel's jaw tightened, then loosened. He tried humor again, a bridge he'd crossed safely for years. "You're being dramatic," he said, and the word fell flat because drama requires exaggeration, and I had none. I reached into the bag and slid the seating chart halfway out, not revealing names, just the color legend printed along the edge. Blue. I tapped it once with my finger and returned it to the bag. Lauren's eyes dropped and lifted. She swallowed. The room leaned further. I felt the boundary lock, not with noise but with compliance. The USB drive stayed sealed, the evidence patient. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to finish the sequence. I met Daniel's eyes and held them, letting him see that the next step belonged to process, not emotion. He opened his mouth, closed it, then glanced toward the stage as if calculating whether he could redirect the room. He couldn't. The geometry wouldn't allow it. I took another step back, giving him space to decide how public he wanted this to be, knowing the answer had already been chosen by his earlier decisions. With the blue badge marking the center, and my place moved to the edge, the seating chart closed every remaining exit. The phrase wasn't spoken, it was understood. Lauren shifted her weight and said my name for the first time that night, a careful attempt at connection. I looked at her and nodded once, acknowledging presence without granting alignment. The DJ cleared his throat near the booth, a small sound that carried. A couple near the door stopped mid-sentence. Daniel breathed in and tried a different tactic, lowering his voice. "Let's not do this here," he said, the plea shaped as reason. I answered with the truth he'd avoided. "This is where it was done," I said, and the room accepted the logic because it matched what everyone had seen. I didn't open the bag. I didn't need to. The evidence existed, and existence was enough to corner the narrative. I stepped aside to allow a server through, keeping the aisle clear, maintaining the choreography he'd relied on, only now it served me. The lights above the stage hummed softly. The glass podium reflected faces back at themselves. I felt the last hesitation drain from my body, replaced by a clean readiness. Daniel nodded once, a concession disguised as composure. He turned toward the stage and took 2 steps, then stopped, realizing the order of operations had changed. I stayed where I was, the bag steady in my hand, the USB drive silent. I thought about how often truth fails because it arrives early before witnesses are ready. I had waited. The room was ready now. I looked past Daniel to Victor, then to the corridor where the authority seat would soon matter. The night had narrowed to a single lane, and we were all standing in it. I held the bag at my side and let the room understand there would be no retreat. The glass podium stood center stage like a promise that refused embellishment, its surface catching faces and returning them unedited. I moved toward it when the music softened to a suggestion, and the room leaned forward without knowing why. Victor met me halfway, eyes steady, policy intact, and angled the podium's light so the surface cleared glare. Phones came up, not all at once, just enough to signal readiness. Daniel stood a step behind the podium, his hand hovering near the edge, as if touch could confer control. Lauren remained close, her posture composed, the center still holding by habit. I placed the clear evidence bag on the podium without ceremony, the red seal visible, the USB drive quiet inside. The plastic rested flat, patient. Victor nodded once and reached for the projector remote, the small click audible in the hush. The screen behind us came alive with a clean lobby frame, bright and ordinary, the kind of image people trust because it doesn't try to persuade. I didn't speak yet. I let the room register the feed. The timestamp appeared in the corner unobtrusive, and Victor scrubbed back exactly as we'd agreed, then advanced to the still I'd marked earlier. The movement froze. The digit settled. The discrepancy didn't shout. It waited. I pointed once, not dramatic, just precise, and said, "This is the moment the seating change was said to occur." I let the sentence end there. The room leaned further. Victor advanced 1 second. The digits refused to reconcile with the explanation that had circulated earlier. A murmur rippled, not outrage, more recalibration. I slid the seating chart from the bag and placed it beside the screen's reflection on the podium, careful to keep names out of view while the color legend remained legible. Blue, the designation for center placement under cameras and remarks. I didn't accuse. I matched. The lobby feed stayed frozen. The doorway split by light, the exact image mirrored by the doorway behind us now. I watched recognition move across faces as the pattern assembled itself without help. Daniel laughed lightly and began, "This is getting blown out of," and stopped when Victor, still neutral, advanced the feed to the next segment. The timestamp jumped in a way that couldn't be smoothed. I felt the room accept the physics of it. I opened the evidence bag and removed the USB drive still sealed, holding it up long enough for the seal to read as intention rather than threat. "This contains the full sequence," I said, my voice level, not loud. "No edits." Phones lifted higher. Lauren's hand tightened around her glass and then stilled. Daniel's face shifted through calculation, then settled into a mask that fit less well under bright light. I nodded to Victor. He took the drive, broke the seal on camera, and inserted it. The feed resumed with sound, a low ambient wash that placed bodies in space. The timeline aligned with the still and contradicted the story that had been offered earlier. Chairs moved. A figure crossed the lobby at a time that made the earlier explanation impossible. The room breathed in together. I felt the glass podium vibrate slightly as someone leaned closer. Under the unforgiving stage light, the timeline resolved itself into a single undeniable line. I stepped back half a pace to give the image room. Daniel opened his mouth again and closed it. Lauren looked at him, then at the screen, and the order of her attention changed. I let the feed finish its loop and asked Victor to pause it at the frame that mattered. He did. I placed my palm on the glass podium, grounding myself in the cold clarity of it, and said, "This isn't about preference, it's about representation." The word settled. I didn't say betrayal. I didn't need to. The image said enough. I reached into my coat and removed the sealed legal envelope, placing it beside the chart. The thick paper added weight without noise. "This was prepared before tonight," I said, and stopped. I didn't open it. Opening wasn't necessary yet. The room understood sequence now. I felt eyes on me that had never looked before. Daniel took a step forward, then stopped when a uniformed presence appeared at the edge of the room, quiet and contained. Officer Natalie Brooks stood just inside the doorway, posture professional, hands, visible eyes taking in the scene without drama. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence landed after proof exactly where it belonged. Victor acknowledged her with a nod that recognized protocol. The room went very still. Daniel turned toward her, then back to the screen, and the calculation ended. I addressed Officer Brooks without turning away from the podium. "Thank you for waiting," I said. She nodded once, acknowledging timing. I slid the envelope toward her unopened, and she accepted it without comment. Phones tracked the transfer. The authority entry didn't escalate, it stabilized. Officer Brooks asked a single clarifying question about the footage's source and chain of custody. Victor answered with policy language, concise and sufficient. She nodded again. The screen remained paused on the frame that mattered, the doorway split by light, the digits unyielding. I felt the night settle into a new shape, one that didn't require my voice anymore. Daniel tried to speak and stopped himself, the first honest pause I'd seen from him all evening. Lauren set her glass down carefully, the sound soft but audible. A guest near the bar exhaled. The DJ powered down the music entirely. The glass podium reflected faces back at themselves, unfiltered. I stepped aside to clear the aisle. As Officer Brooks moved closer to the podium, her presence measured respectful, unavoidable. She indicated the footage and asked Victor to preserve the file. He confirmed. She indicated the envelope and secured it. Process took over without spectacle. I felt my shoulders drop an inch. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. The truth had entered with its badge visible and stayed standing. Daniel looked at me, then really looked, and I saw the moment he understood that charm had reached its limit. I met his gaze without anger and without relief. The work wasn't emotional. It was done. Officer Brooks spoke quietly to Daniel, not accusatory, just procedural, and he nodded, compliance replacing confidence. Lauren stepped back, space opening where center had been. I watched the center loosen and felt no urge to fill it. The podium remained glass and honest. I gathered the remaining papers and left them on the podium where cameras could see their neutrality. The room exhaled together. I turned toward the doorway and felt the line of light move with me, no longer a barrier, but a passage. The room held its breath as authorities stood where the proof had already arrived. The hard copy notice letter lay flat on the glass podium after the screen went dark, its presence quieter than the footage, but heavier in consequence. The paper was thick, uncreased, the kind chosen to hold shape under scrutiny, and Officer Brooks positioned it so the header was visible without inviting reading aloud. Process took the lead now. Victor confirmed preservation again, this time into a recorder that noted names and steps with the calm authority of routine. Daniel stood where the center had been and discovered it no longer belonged to him. His shoulders adjusted as if searching for the posture that used to work. It didn't. Lauren stepped back another pace, the gravity that had held her loosening as the room recalibrated. I moved to the side of the podium, not retreating, just clearing the line so the sequence could finish cleanly. Officer Brooks asked for Daniel's identification, her voice level, respectful, procedural. He complied, hands steady enough, and the exchange registered on phones without spectacle. The legal letter remained unopened, not because it lacked content, but because its function had already been achieved, notice served by presence. Margaret arrived quietly at the edge of the room, coat still on eyes, moving from the podium to the officer to me, understanding without needing a briefing. She nodded once and waited, giving the room space to accept what had already happened. Daniel tried to speak to me, then his voice pitched low, private out of habit. "We can talk," he said, the offer late but earnest. I met his eyes and answered with accuracy. "We will," I said, and let the rest remain unsaid. Lauren watched the exchange with a composure that now read as calculation rather than confidence. A guest near the bar asked a server for the check, a mundane request that signaled life continuing under a new arrangement. Officer Brooks asked Victor for the incident log and received it without friction. She flipped to the relevant page, scanned, and nodded. The chain held. I felt my pulse settle into something like relief, but cleaner. Not joy. Completion. The glass podium reflected Margaret's silhouette as she stepped closer and placed her card beside the letter, not claiming the moment, just anchoring it legally. She spoke to Officer Brooks in a low voice, exchanging terms that landed without drama. Daniel listened and nodded, the nods coming easier now that resistance had ended. Phones lowered as interest shifted from shock to outcome. The DJ stood idle, hands folded, waiting for instruction that wouldn't come. The room's lighting remained bright and honest, faces readable, no shadows left to negotiate. I took a step back and felt the space widen for the first time all night. The center didn't rush to fill. It didn't need to. Officer Brooks concluded the immediate steps clear and concise, and indicated that follow-up would occur through counsel. Daniel accepted the direction with the calm of someone who finally understood the rules being applied. Lauren excused herself quietly, slipping toward the coat check, without comment, the path opening for her without resistance. I watched her go and felt nothing sharp rise to meet it. That surprised me. Margaret touched my arm lightly, a grounding gesture, and asked if I wanted to step out for air. I did. We moved toward the doorway together, the line of light no longer splitting, but guiding. As we crossed it, the room resumed its murmur, not denial, just continuation. Outside the main space, the air was cooler, the noise reduced to a manageable hum. Margaret spoke briefly about next steps, about timelines and options, her voice steady, her language precise. I listened and nodded, grateful for the structure. Inside, Daniel spoke with Officer Brooks one last time, then turned toward the room, scanning faces that now reflected consequence rather than admiration. He didn't look for me. That too was an ending. I returned to the podium once more to collect the remaining documents, leaving the letter where it belonged until process completed. The glass felt cold under my fingers, honest and unyielding. I gathered my coat and adjusted the bracelet I'd worn all night, the small ritual marking closure. People approached me then, quietly offering support without questions. I thanked them and declined conversation, conserving energy for what came next. The authority had done its work. The legal line had been drawn. As I stepped toward the exit, I heard Daniel's voice behind me say my name, not loud, not pleading, just present. I turned and met his gaze. He said, "I'm sorry," without qualifiers. I nodded once, accepting the sentence without assigning it power. The apology didn't erase the record. It didn't need to. The record stood. I left the room with Margaret at my side, the door closing softly behind us. No applause, no confrontation, just the sound of a latch settling into place. The night ended not with noise, but with a letter that finally spoke for me. The security wristband rests against my pulse as I stand just outside the venue, the plastic warm where it touches skin, a small loop that once meant access and now means passage. The night air is cool and clean, carrying the quiet aftermath of what has already finished inside. I hold my coat closed with one hand and let the other fall to my side, feeling the ground steady under my shoes. Present tense sharpens everything. The door behind me closes with a soft latch, not a slam, and the sound settles without echo. Light spills through the glass for a moment, then steadies bright enough to reveal faces, gentle enough to release them. I breathe and feel the breath move without resistance. Margaret stands nearby, a respectful distance, phone away, work complete for now. She doesn't fill the silence. She never does when silence is doing its job. I look at the wristband again and slide it once between my fingers, remembering how earlier it signaled where I could go and where I couldn't. Now it's a reminder that access changes when truth enters cleanly. I step forward, and the light shifts with me, no longer splitting the floor, but smoothing into a continuous path. The doorway holds open without tension. I cross it and feel nothing pull me back. Inside my head, the sequence settles into order. The guest list, the badge, the keycard, the mic. The log, the remote, the envelope. The still, the drive, the podium. Each object did its work, and then stepped aside. No theatrics. No excess. I understand now that control isn't loud, it's precise. The wristband clicks softly as I adjust it, the sound tiny but decisive. I take a few steps down the corridor toward the exit doors and hear the venue resume its normal rhythm behind me. Voices lowering coats, retrieved people recalibrating stories for tomorrow. The night will be retold, but not rewritten. That matters. Outside, a car passes, tires hissing on pavement. Ordinary life continuing without consulting me. I smile at that. Continuation is a gift. I pause near the threshold where indoor light meets outdoor dark and feel the final echo of the motif resolve itself. The half-light that once held me at the edge now opens fully, neither shadow nor glare, just visibility without demand. I turn my wrist, and the band catches the light, translucent and unremarkable. It doesn't confer anything anymore. It doesn't need to. I think about how long I confused preparation with belonging, how often I believed if I stayed useful enough, the doorway would stop moving. It doesn't stop. It reveals. That's the difference. Margaret asks if I'm ready to go. I nod and say yes because readiness no longer requires rehearsal. We walk together toward the exit doors, and the automatic sensors respond without argument. The doors slide open. The night receives us. Outside, the air feels colder, honest, in a way rooms rarely are. I pull my coat tighter and laugh once softly at nothing in particular. Margaret asks if I want to talk through next steps now or later. I choose later. Choosing feels good. She understands, and we exchange a look that says, "Enough has been done for tonight." She heads toward her car, and I head toward mine, our paths diverging with the ease of adults who trust process. I stop once and look back at the venue, its windows bright, its glass reflecting a version of me that looks steady. I don't wave. I don't linger. The wristband presses gently into my skin, and I slide it off, not in anger, not ceremonially, just because I'm done with it. I fold it once and slip it into my pocket. Objects don't need speeches when their work is complete. I sit in the driver's seat and let the quiet fill the car. My hands rest on the wheel without gripping. The dashboard light glows patient. I don't start the engine yet. I let the moment land. The apology Daniel offered floats through my mind and settles without weight. It exists. It doesn't govern anything. That's okay. I think about the record and how it now lives independently of my feelings. That's better than closure. Closure implies a door shut by force. This feels like a door held open long enough for me to walk through at my own pace. I start the engine and feel the vibration move through the seat, grounding familiar. As I pull out the headlights, cut a clean line across the pavement, and I follow it without hesitation. On the drive home, the city unfolds in quiet layers: streetlights, empty storefronts, the occasional late diner glowing like a pocket of warmth. I keep my radio off. I don't need accompaniment. My phone stays face down. Messages can wait. I pass a familiar intersection and take it without thinking, muscle memory guiding me. The wristband shifts in my pocket as the car turns, and I touch it once, acknowledging the symbol, without granting it power. At a red light, I catch my reflection in the rearview mirror and hold my own gaze. I look like myself again, not the version edited by proximity to someone else's choices. The light turns green and I go. When I reach home, I park and sit for a moment longer. The house is dark, quiet, welcoming without ceremony. I unlock the door and step inside, setting my keys down where they always go. The silence here is different, private, restorative. I hang my coat and slip my shoes off, feeling the floor cool beneath my feet. I take the wristband out of my pocket and place it in a drawer with other small things that once mattered and now don't. The drawer closes with a soft click. I wash my hands and watch the water run clear, then dry them and turn off the light. In the hallway, the lamp casts a gentle glow enough to see without demanding attention. I stand there and breathe. Standing in full light, I realize the doorway finally holds still. I move into the living room and sit, letting the quiet settle around me like a blanket. Tomorrow we'll have tasks and conversations and logistics. Tonight has resolution. I don't rehearse what I'll say if asked. I don't imagine alternate endings. I trust the one that arrived because it didn't need my permission to be true. I lean back and close my eyes for a second, then open them, present and unafraid. The house holds me without conditions. The night releases me without debt. I choose the ending, and it chooses me back.